Monday morning, the 12th of May. One of the stories we want to talk to you about today is adoption. You may have had experience of adoption. You may have been adopted yourself. You may be involved in foster care or looking after children with some experience of being in care or being through the adoption system. It's huge. It's a massive, massive thing for the family, for the child, for everyone involved. And lots of children who have faced a difficult start in their life will be supported with their new family. But often some of that disruption that happens in very early life can affect them for the rest of their lives. They might need things like therapy for quite a long time to help with that. Something to help process the stuff they went through when they were very, very little. But this morning, you're hearing from a mum in Wolverhampton who says that government funding to these type of therapy sessions will be devastating for her adoptive children. She says they've really benefited from having them. She's Amanda James, who's adopted siblings, and says that this move to cut this funding will disadvantage young people who've had a traumatic start in life.
It's devastating, not just for myself, but thinking of families that are in crisis right now. It could really make the difference between a child being able to stay in that family home or having to go to a residential placement to be kept safe or for the family to be kept safe. The Adoption Support Fund really is a lifeline. I still have a worry for my children as they get older, how they're going to manage being independent, working, sort of getting on in society. And they potentially might need to access that fund again in the future, perhaps several times as different things happen in their lives. So it is a real worry. It's devastating.
Devastating, she says, that this fund has been cut, and she's coming on the show after 8 o'clock this morning, so you'll hear a bit more explanation of this from Amanda. But basically, this funding, last year, each eligible child could access £2,500 for specialist assessment and then £5,000 for therapy to help them talk through and understand some of the things they've been through, perhaps when they were very young. This therapy limit has now been cut to £3,000 a year, and separate funding for specialist assessment has been axed. The Department for Education called it a difficult decision. They said that demand for support was growing significantly. Let's talk to someone who knows all about this. Anna Sharkey, the Chief Executive of Adoption Focus, based just outside Solihull, but helping families right across the West Midlands and beyond. Hello, Anna. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
What's your reaction then to the cuts to this fund?
I think it's been a really difficult situation for a number of families. Adoption Focus is a voluntary adoption agency, which means we don't directly get public funding, and as a voluntary adoption agency, don't have direct access to the Adoption Support Fund. But some of the families that we work with have been able to do so through the local authority that placed the children with them. And for those families, it can be really, really important because some children will have had very difficult early life experiences, which will continue to impact, and for which therapy can be very important.
And they've said, those families have that it's been significant for those kids. It's really helped.
Yeah, completely. And it's not just directly for the children, it will also be for the parents who are caring for them, because children bring their trauma with them, and those families need the assistance available to them to support their children to grow into the adults that they can be.
And what impact do you think the cuts could have then on adopted children and their families?
I think the one of the big things at the moment is the concern that there won't be support and that there is nothing available. And as I've just said before, Adoption Focus does not directly access the Adoption Support Fund, but we certainly have families that have made use of it. All adoption agencies will be providing additional and different types of support to their families, because we don't expect people to just be able to get on and do this all on their own. Although, of course, there are some adoptive families that do so. Because adoption isn't just incredibly difficult, it can also be very, very positive. It has really good outcomes for children. And the last thing I want this announcement to have done is to put people off from coming forward to consider adoption as something they could do in their family, because we know for those children that are adopted, they achieve so much better than children who may remain in the care system with lack of certainty about where they may be from 1 month to the next because of how care can work sometimes.
And it must be amazing to see those positive stories and to hear people talk about the difference it's made in their lives. But is that what worries you then, Anna? That the fact that this funding has now been cut, that it might put people off?
It may well put people off, and really what I want to do is reassure people that they're not on their own. There's a whole range of services that are available. Our organisation has a number of support groups. It has buddies, which are other adoptive families that work alongside newly placed adopters. We offer direct work with children. We don't provide therapy because therapeutic support is a very specialist provision and must be done properly, which is why children and families need that proper assessment at the point at which they may consider that that is something that they need. And I think there is the wider concern about other cuts that the government is having to make, which is impacting on all families in terms of access to specialist support to help all families. We know that family life is complicated at times, regardless of how you have become family, and the services that are available in relation to, for example, the CAMS service, which is the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, that people can wait really long periods of time before they actually access that support.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard so many stories like that where, CAMS are so stretched and the waiting list can be very long. Anna, thank you for coming on and telling us about it and for the work that you do at Adoption Focus. We'll talk to Amanda, who's this mum that you heard earlier, who's really worried about this. She's worried that these cuts to therapy will be devastating, will disadvantage young people who've had a difficult start in life and might even put people off adopting a child in the first place.
Let's go.
On BBC iPlayer.
Got my race head on.
The highest high.
8:05 this morning, and I cannot wait for it. It's 8 now. One of the stories we're telling you about this morning is adopting a child. And I'm sure if you know anybody who's been adopted, or if you've had a family that you're involved in who's been through the adoption process, incredibly rewarding, can be absolutely life-changing for the children, for everybody in the family, and can just turn things around for kids who've had a very difficult start in life and sometimes faced years in care. But because of that difficulty, because of that early disruption to their life and often trauma, they might need a bit of extra help, they might need some therapy. But there are government cuts coming to the funding that adopted families can get for therapy. And we're hearing from a mum from Wolverhampton this morning who said it will be devastating for her adoptive children and others like them. So the way this works is, last year at least, each eligible child could access £2,500 for specialist assessment and then £5,000 for therapy, which is expensive. But the therapy limit's now been cut down to £3,000, while separate funding for specialist assessment has been axed. The Department for Education said it would mean that more children would be able to access support. But not everyone's happy about this, particularly families who are making use of it and say it's crucial to their family's well-being. Around 1,000 people went on a march to Downing Street earlier this month to protest the government's cuts to the fund, which was announced in April. We've been talking about this on the show. Earlier on, I spoke to Anna Sharkey, Chief Executive of Adoption Focus, helping families in the West Midlands. And I asked her if she thought this might put people off adopting children in the first place.
It may well put people off, and really what I want to do is reassure people that they're not on their own. There's a whole range of services that are available. Our organisation has a number of support groups. It has buddies, which are other adoptive families that work alongside newly placed adopters. We offer direct work with children, and I think there is the wider concern about other cuts that the government is having to make, which is impacting on all families in terms of access to specialist support to help all families. We know that family life is complicated at times, regardless of how you have become family, and the services that are available in relation to, for example, the CAMS service, which is the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, that people can wait really long periods of time before they actually access that support.
Amanda James is an adoptive mum of 2 in Wolverhampton, really worried about the cuts to this fund. Hello, morning Amanda.
Good morning, thanks for speaking to me.
Well, thanks for telling your story. Are you able to tell me about the children and when you adopted them and what they're like?
Yes, certainly. My daughter is now 16 and my son, who's a full birth sibling, is 13. So I adopted as a single adopter 14 years ago, when my daughter was almost 2. She came from a home of neglect and violence, and came with trauma. She'd been in a foster placement for most of her life, because it took a while for them to sort of decide that she would need to be adopted. So she was quite young, but it was fairly evident quite quickly that she got a lot of problems arising from the early life trauma and the grief that she'd been through.
Yeah. Fascinating this, isn't it, how little ones' brains work. I have a little insight into this. My husband works with kids who've been through quite a bit of trauma in their early life. And even if they were very, 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 very young when some of this happens, it can have a massive impact, can't it, on the rest of their life?
Absolutely. And they can be so young that they don't actually have any memories of what happened, but that sort of emotional imprint of the trauma is there, and they can't make sense of why they feel how they do, or even how they're feeling. They're kind of stuck in fight, flight and freeze mode. And even my son, he was 11 months when he was placed with me. He'd been in just one foster placement, which was an absolutely lovely foster home, and he'd never been home from hospital with birth family. And initially things seemed sort of easier with him. He seemed less affected, but as he's grown up, I've been able to see the effects, even as a young baby, that adoptions had on him.
In what way? What sort of effect does it have on him now as a teenager?
He's a lot of the things people would say, oh, that's just sort of normal teenage behaviour, and all I can say is it's more enhanced, it's sort of more deep, and he gets sort of stuck. So he's not going to school. I've ended up deregistering him. He just cannot cope with school at all. He needs a high level of control to feel safe, which obviously can be quite wearing on the rest of the family.
Yeah.
He struggles to still let me parent him, because to feel safe, he needs to know he can rely on himself and he's in charge, and that can be quite difficult. And he's just generally sort of very anxious.
A lot of it is so familiar from some of the conversations I have with my husband that works with children, and as I say, I think it's incredible that lasting impact of trauma at a very young age, which is, I guess, why this therapy has been useful. Have you found it useful? Has it helped them?
Yeah, I mean, when I first adopted my daughter, it wasn't available, and it was difficult to get support, even though I had some support from Adoption UK, and the local authority in Wolverhampton were pretty good. I couldn't access the specialist therapy for her. So she's accessed various things, play therapy, a specialist psychotherapy called dyadic developmental psychotherapy, DDT, which is aimed specifically at attachment trauma. She's had integration therapy, and more recently, when she started to get in touch with birth family through social media, ASGSF helped around that. So we've used it a lot.
And what about this cut then? What do you think, what's the impact going to be on families like yours?
It's really worrying, because you can't put a cap, or you certainly can't put such a low cap on the therapy that children need. They need ongoing, in-depth support. It's really specialist. You can't get it through the NHS. You'd have to go private if you couldn't access it through the fund, and it needs to be continuous. So the worry is, with the cap, that kids maybe who've had weekly sessions with their therapist might have to drop to fortnightly. We didn't know that the fund was going to be renewed until really late on, so there were applications for this financial year on hold. Some therapists even giving therapy for free so that it didn't break the continuation, because if the child therapist suddenly isn't there for them, that just echoes on the grief and the trauma that they've previously had, and it can do more harm than good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for telling us about it, and we hear your concerns. That's Amanda James about this cut in this funding for therapy for adopted children. A Department for Education spokesperson said they're investing £50 million for the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund to continue for another year, and they say they've had to take tough decisions, but they will ensure that the fund is financially sustainable to allow more vulnerable children to access targeted support.
In the 19th